So welcome from Paperspace Asia. Today's episode, we will explore how office spaces become psychologically safe places. I'm speaking with Dr. Peter Brace, head of PsychSafety Asia-Pacific, about how our office design community can move beyond creating functional workspaces to crafting environments where teams genuinely thrive. Together, we're going to endeavor to discover how the principles of psychological safety can transform the way we approach design, creating spaces where innovation flourishes, collaboration feels natural, and people bring their authentic selves to work every day. Peter, good afternoon for me. Good afternoon for you from Melbourne.
It was great to be here.
Peter's actually an expert, and I've got a focus down here on both psychological and psychosocial safety. To me, one of the gurus in that area. So maybe to start, the thing to do would be, Peter, tell us about who you are and what's psychological safety and psychosocial safety.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I'm working as a consultant in this area. I've had quite a long career, mainly in the technical side of IT, but the past maybe 15 years or so, I've worked a lot with people, systems, and processes. But when you come down to it, all work we do with technology is about the people in the end. And I guess one of the insights I came to is that when you look at some workplaces, you feel good in them. When you think back to other workplaces, you feel not so good. And I was thinking about, well, what makes that difference? What makes some places good to work at and other places not good to work at? And to me, it really comes down to, and this may be sound a bit strange because I'm talking to you, but it's not about the physical space. It's the psychological space that people are in that makes the difference. And I think what you've done in Paperspace is to try and connect those two. So you try and make a good physical space, which affects the way that people feel, and then they're going to work together better. So it's not as against the physical space as it might sound. They're definitely connected there. And I discovered psychological safety probably 5 or 6 years ago, and realized just how important that is in creating a good environment for people to work in. And I'm happy to talk a bit more about what that is, where it comes from. If you have any other questions about me, just throw them at me.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I do want you to continue. I think that for me, it was so important because you hear so much about it. And, you know, when we design office spaces, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to understand, you know, what the business objectives are or what the people objectives are. You know, you don't just, very few people, if any, design office spaces because they want their office to look pretty, right? I mean, it's pretty hard to justify that. You know, you can give it a touch up, but a major change actually requires some really deep reasons for it, whether they be collaboration or cooperation or return to office or a better customer service. You know, and after all the years we were talking about, I kept thinking, you know, like, psychological safety must play a role in there. And I guess what I wanted to do today was connect those dots, you know, not just for me, but for those people with whom we're going to share this video, because they've undoubtedly heard or read bits and pieces. But if they're anything like me, they're also maybe just struggling to connect the dots. So I think maybe the next step is like, you know, continue on with your story about psych safety and how do we help? How does an office space, how does an environment, you know, contribute to that being better or more positive? Or does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So let's talk a bit about what psychological safety is. Now, the term itself has been around since the 60s. A couple of consultants came up with this term when they were looking at what makes teams work effectively or not. But then it kind of moved out of the visible space a bit until probably the 2000s. Professor at Harvard, Amy Edmondson, she revived the interest in psychological safety, and she's done a lot of great work in educating people about it, publicizing it, and providing tools to look at it. But what it is, it's really a feeling, and it's a feeling that you get when you're working with a group of people that you feel safe to be yourself. And that involves being able to speak up, share your ideas, let people know what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and even when you get to the highest levels of psychological safety, to be able to, in the middle of that group of people, to be able to challenge the way that things are done in that group. And, you know, within the workplace, every group, every team has a leader. And when psychological safety is high, you feel safe to be able to talk to that leader and suggest maybe there are different ways to do things, share your ideas about improvement. And if you think back to groups that you've worked in, there's probably a lot that you can think of, I think we all can, where we just didn't want to raise an issue with the boss. We did not feel safe, right?
Yep.
And what the feeling of safety doesn't come from the fear that we're going to be attacked, you know, physically attacked by someone, but it's those little subtle things that make us feel like we're not really part of that group. So you know, if we raise an issue in a meeting and we're ignored, if we mention something we're concerned about and we get laughed at, or we get that look that clearly shows us we shouldn't have said that, that immediately shows us that this is not a psychologically safe space. And when you think of that dynamic within a group, you really want in a group people to share their ideas, their different perspectives, because particularly if you have a diverse group of people, everyone's going to have a different idea about things. And when you combine those together, the group is going to be stronger, right? It'll be more innovative. Yeah. You know, people are more likely to report when they have a problem. People are more likely to work together on resolving an issue. And there's a great story when, you know, I mentioned Professor Edmondson at Harvard, when she started to look into psychological safety. She was looking at medical teams, and she made a hypothesis that, you know, if the level of psychological safety is high, that team is going to work together better, and there will be less medical errors. So, you know, you're in the Philippines. A lot of Filipinos are nurses, work in the medical profession, and I think a lot of people understand how that works, right? So her expectation was, if you have a psychologically safe team, you'll have less mistakes, like wrong medication, you know, mistakes in surgery, all those kind of things. So she surveyed a lot of teams, got their level of psychological safety, got the errors that they were reporting, and she found exactly the opposite to what she expected.
Okay.
That teams that felt less psychologically safe were actually reporting less errors. And the teams that were psychologically safe were reporting more errors. But when she looked into it further, she found it wasn't the number of errors that were being made. It was that the teams that felt psychologically unsafe did not report the errors. So, for example, if a doctor prescribed the wrong medication and the nurse, who often has more experience than the doctor, knew it was wrong, in a psychologically unsafe team, the nurse would not speak up. They would just keep quiet. And so the error was not being reported, but the patient would suffer.
Yeah. Okay.
So, in a psychologically safe team, you expect people to challenge you, to tell you if you've got something wrong. It doesn't have to do that in a harsh way, but they feel safe to be able to raise an issue with people. So I think you can immediately see the benefits that would bring.
So I can see how mindset change, consultation, all different efforts could help. How does a work environment contribute? I mean, I think that's the one where I struggle, and one that I'd certainly love to be able to bring up when we're talking to clients, to say, have you considered it? Because to use your analogy, someone may have considered it and is not talking about it.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe you could sort of give some thought, explain a little bit further about that to help myself and our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because, you want to understand what makes psychological safety high or not, right? There must be factors that influence it. And one of the most interesting facts about it is that the leader of the team has an influence over more than half the level of psychological safety. So the leader of the team is really influential in how that team feels. And again, thinking back to our own experiences working in teams, the people we work with have some impact on whether we feel psychologically safe or not. But in most cases, it's the boss that has the greatest impact. And what the boss says when someone raises a question or brings an issue to their attention, everybody notices that, and everybody takes that into account when they're thinking about whether to speak up or not. But the factors that influence it have been researched, and they've been researched by neuroscientists, so those people who understand what's going on within the brain when we're in certain situations. And there's a neuroscientist called David Rock who looked into this, and he suggested that there's 5 different factors that influence the level of psychological safety. And if we run through those, again, you and those who are watching this can think about teams they've been in and the impact that these factors have had. So one is the feeling of the status that we have in the team. So do we feel like we matter to that group? Now, if we do feel like we matter, no matter what our role is, we're more likely to feel safe to raise an issue. So our status in the group, regardless of whether we're the formal leader or what our title is a good indication of whether the level of psychological safety is going to be high or low. Certainty is another factor. So how predictable is that team environment? And thinking about a leader of a team, we probably all work with people who we never know how they're going to react, right? Some days they're good, some days they're terrible. That immediately challenges the level of psychological safety in that group. So if there's a level of uncertainty from the leader or from the work that we're doing, so we're never quite sure what's going to happen next in this team, again, that helps us feel a bit anxious, and we're less likely to challenge, to communicate clearly, to communicate freely. So that's status, certainty, autonomy. So the feeling that we have control as much as we possibly can over the work that we do. Yeah. Those 5 areas, that the status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness or belonging, and fairness or equity, they're the 5 factors that really influence the level of psychological safety in a team.
So how does an organization like Paperspace take those and address them via a physical environment? Or at least try to address them, and make some sort of, at least, minimal or whatever, maybe hopefully more than minimal impact via the environment we create for these people to work in.
And it's interesting. I was reading through some of the material about Paperspace that you sent me. So it was like a set of case studies of office redesigns that you've done, and one of them, I think the name was Kantar, actually said that the level of communication with executives had improved because of your office redesign. Now, that's a clear indication that something you did there had improved the level of psychological safety, because people were more willing to communicate with the leaders of the organization. So somehow, something that was done in that design had helped people feel more psychologically safe. And if you look at the design process that you follow, I think one of the principles that you follow at Paperspace is you get people involved in what the design is going to be.
Correct.
So you talk to them, you ask them what's important to them, you talk to them about the work they do, which seems quite natural. But when you link it to those factors that improve psychological safety, you're addressing some of those, right? You are immediately helping people to feel like they have more control over their workspace, because you're asking them, what would you like? What should this look like? How would it help you? You're helping people appreciate they have status, they matter, right? Because you have taken the trouble to talk to them and ask them, haven't just brought in a design and imposed it on them. You've talked to them, you've asked them what they want, you've helped them to feel like they are important, they have a part in this process, their level of autonomy is greater, they feel like this is fair, like it's not being imposed on them, they're part of the process. So you're actually touching on many of the factors that help improve people's psychological safety just by following that process of asking people, getting them involved, having a consultation process. That in itself is helpful.
Would it be fair then to kind of extend that? So would it be fair then that organizations like our own, that when we do what we do and we do our consultative process beforehand, we actually call it workplace strategy, but as you said, it's consultative, it's a discovery session, that we ourselves should understand some of the basics of psychological safety. So we actually know what questions to ask, because we could phrase them in terms of collaboration and cooperation. But, I think by definition, we often don't understand how deep that may go.
Mm.
We understand the concept that if people speak more often and work together, and projects get done faster and hopefully they get done better.
Yep.
But is that just the tip of the iceberg? And in fact, we could actually dig, interpret answers or ask answers in a way where we get much more meaningful, a much more meaningful understanding. Should this be part of our consultative process?
Yes, I believe so. And if you understand what it is that drives psychological safety, then you'll understand more about why you're asking these questions, right? And why that has such an impact on people when they get involved. If the boss comes along and says they were going to have a new office, everyone goes, "Oh, great," But if then the process says, okay, let's talk to you about what you do in the office, what you need in the office, what would make you feel good about coming to work. Suddenly you feel even better about it, right? You're not just getting a new office, you're getting a new office that you have co-created. So helping people feel and actually making sure that you listen to what people tell you. And not every suggestion can be followed. But we're talking about grown-ups here, right? So if you explain to someone, we loved your suggestion about, hanging plants from the ceiling, but the cost of maintaining that is going to be prohibitive, and there are people in the office with allergies to pollen or whatever, right? So if you can explain why the suggestion wasn't followed, people go, oh, they're not just ignoring me, they did take it into account, and I understand why they couldn't do it. So a process like that, again, helps people feel involved, and they are involved, but the important part is that people actually feel involved.
Yeah.
Because when it comes down to it, this is just a feeling, right? It's not really a rational reaction. It's not about our reason. It's about our emotions and our feelings. And one of the things we learn from psychological safety is that the way we feel drives the way that we think and the way that we act. So you've really got to start with that feeling.
You actually remind me of, so personally, I've always been heavily involved in working with people who either suffer from depression or anxiety, because I had a long period of my life where that was a major factor. So I got to know quite a few people, and that subject matter brought us together. And I remember, you make me remember a couple of conversations I had with some of these folks who said that, when they came to the office and their office was the traditional, desk divider, desk divider, desk divider, desk divider, yeah. And all of this was cramped into this, little tiny space that their day was almost borderline working and struggling, because it was this feeling of being trapped. And that was one that I couldn't get out of my mind. And another one who they had, this was before I even joined Paperspace, but they had an office renovation, and they had put flooring down, which extended up on the walls, and the texture made these people like uncomfortable. And this person was not a senior, but a mid-level manager. So his performance was degraded. And then obviously, because his performance was degraded, that then got passed on. And these were situations that I had never actually kind of thought about, although I had been through the first one, which I think as a company like ours, we should be aware of, because there are a lot of people who perhaps are even struggling with other issues. We're not aware of them. And maybe during the discovery, that's something we can, uncover. I don't know what your thoughts are about that, or am I taking it too far now?
One of the biggest threats to our level of psychological safety is that feeling of belonging.
Yeah.
And that affects different people differently. I'm really strong on that, right? That's something that really worries me if I feel like I don't belong in a group, or I get really stressed, right? Other people might not be affected so much, but still we all have this need to feel like we're part of a group. And if you think back to humans' ancient history, we could not survive if we were not part of a group, right? A tribe or a little village.
Yeah.
So we have that in our DNA, the feeling that what's going to happen to me if I don't belong to this group, right? There isn't really a physical threat.
Yes.
But our brain, the neuroscientists who have scanned people's brains, they've scanned them in when they're feeling like they're excluded from a group. And the part of the brain that is activated is very much the same part of the brain that's activated when you're in physical pain. So that pain of being excluded, or feeling you don't belong, it really is like a physical discomfort, which is why that when that happens to us, we tend to shrink, we keep quiet, and in a workplace, you don't want that. You want people to feel like they belong, that they can contribute, and if they feel that way, then they will contribute.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that it's both sides of the coin. We need to not just involve management when we're doing our discovery or workplace strategy about the office. We need to involve the employees as well. because of all those reasons. And then after the work is done, that should be an end result, right? That creation of a tribe, for lack of a better term, right? That there's an onus on us and an onus on a company. Let me ask you something else. I read a lot about I predominantly because of you, but on psychological safety and the impacts, and you write some awesome articles in LinkedIn about it. Do you think we're at the stage we should be at? Where managers, directors, company leaders understand the importance of psychological safety and its relationship to productivity and etc. Or do you think we've still got a ways to go or a long ways to go? And I know you're talking from the perspective of Australia, but how do you think we're going there? Are we grasping that concept fast enough?
Well, my sort of tagline, my email tagline is, making every workplace a better place for everyone. So we are on that journey, right? And workplaces are getting better, but there are still some workplaces that are not where they should be. And there are still some folks who feel like they're not really part of that workplace. So we have work to do there, and it's affected too by the culture where the workplace operates.
Yeah.
Across the Asia-Pacific region, there are cultures that have what sociologists call high power distance, and that's talking about the difference in power and status between the ordinary worker and the leader. Now in Europe, for example, you tend to have a small power distance. So, the worker can speak in a very friendly way to the leader. They can call them by their first name. Within a lot of the Asia-Pacific region, there's high power distance. And it's not better or worse, it's just different. And that's not just in the workplace, in the society in general. Older people tend to be respected more in the Asia-Pacific region. Older brothers and sisters often have a special status in the family, which doesn't exist in a lot of Europe and the US. So it's, there's some beautiful things about that culture, but it is a challenge to helping people speak up to their leader and raise issues and share ideas, because people are more hesitant to do that because of the culture in which they've grown up.
Do you think that the younger generations following you and I, who are from caveman, the caveman generation, do you think they're helping change that? Do you think that they're contributing to some level of normalization, or even within Southeast Asia or greater part of Asia, to sort of like maybe a little bit more equal? As I'm saying this, I'm thinking about we were recently at a prospect organization, not here in the Philippines. So before anybody in the Philippines calls me, it wasn't here. And they weren't a very big office that they were looking at redoing, but they made it absolutely clear to us that at least a third of that very small space had to be devoted to the country leader.
Okay.
And that was actually a major priority.
Yeah.
So now you had this person essentially in his own little kingdom.
Yeah.
With not just them locked from him, but I guess him locked from them.
Yes. Yes.
And with it, I'm listening to you thinking and wondering, I wonder how much communication actually really happens.
Yeah.
Because the door's closed. I mean, He actually mentioned like it's not an open door thing. That's not our policy. Right. So it was, and I don't think he meant it in any way other than culturally.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether or not, like the younger ones are helping, or that hasn't, you don't see that happening.
Well, what I see happening is that as younger people enter the workforce, they sometimes get a bit of a shock because they expect a more egalitarian environment where they can share their ideas, where they can speak up. And sometimes they're met with a barrier that, we don't speak up here, we don't share our ideas. But that's a problem for the business. I had a conversation a while ago with a very senior executive in a large company in Asia, and he was talking about the CEO. And he said that the CEO wants to hear more ideas. He wants more innovation in our company, but everyone's too afraid to approach him with an idea that they don't already know he's going to like.
Yeah.
And so that's a great example of, in a high level of psychological safety, you will get ideas brought up, right, which you wouldn't get if there isn't psychological safety there. And a big office and a big desk create barriers. And of course, sometimes the CEO needs his private space because he's going to have conversations that not everyone should be able to hear. But if the general attitude is that I'm better than everybody else, you got to talk to my secretary before you talk to me, then you're going to lose out on those ideas. I mean, the example I think of with innovation is this one. If you think of folks who are disabled in some way, maybe they have a hearing difficulty, a vision problem or problem with mobility, those people are innovative pretty much every day of their life. They have to be innovative to live in the world where the rest of us live. They have to find new ways to get around, to access things, to get information. Yet they are the people who are perhaps least likely to feel that they belong in an organization. So, you've got a huge resource there of people who understand innovation, who are used to innovating in their own life. You want to tap into that for your organization. But if those people don't feel like they belong, don't feel like they're listened to, then you're missing out on a lot. Well, I think one of the hot topics that I'm hearing and seeing a lot about these days is what's called psychosocial hazards. Now, these are the things that in a workplace, we all know what physical hazards are in a workplace. They're, in an office, they're things like a loose carpet, or there's a sharp edge on a table or desk, or in a factory, it's an unguarded machine. And one of the difficulties about that is that it's very hard to see a hazard that's going to hurt someone mentally. Because, for example, a job that's not well defined, some people will be stressed out by that. Other people will love it. They'll say, oh, I can make this job my own, Yeah. So the key to that is really getting people within the workplace to feel free to share how they're feeling, right? To say, I'm really stressed out by the work that I've had to do today. I had a really difficult customer on the phone and I just can't get over that. And people will not speak up unless they feel psychologically safe.
Yeah.
So this is really, again, emphasizing the importance of creating that psychologically safe environment. And the work that you do in involving people in the office design and asking them what they need, creating spaces where people can calm down if they've had a really stressful phone call, for example, where people can get together and talk and share ideas, where people can, join in with their colleagues when they feel that they need to, and people can get a quiet space as well. Taking all those factors into account is really going to help a lot of people have a far better experience in the workplace. And as the younger workers come in, who often appear to be more sensitive to some of these issues, it's doubly important that leaders are aware of these factors.
Dr. Peter Brace, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks,
Good. Thanks. It is a great pleasure to talk to you as always. Thank you for your kind words, and look forward to talking again soon.